Let's talk about AX2, AX2, Secrets of the Nethercity by Alexandrer, Macris with Newton Grant. This it was part of a Kickstarter along with AX3. This is a mini mega dungeon, let's call it. I haven't actually done a full. He calls it a kilodungeon, which I think, fitting. That's a mini mega dungeon. 20 different interlocking areas, such as the Great Temple of the Awakening, the Alchemic Laboratory, the Hallowed Hall of Heroes, and the Secret Alien Sepulchre. And then, with cartography by Dyson Logos, for lots of full colour art. And then there's a bunch of extras, rules for use with ACKS, ACKS, Adventure Conquer King system, which is a update of Basic of Beckme specifically, I believe, and particularly famous and well known for its incredibly granular, detailed domain rules and army rules. And the joke is lots of support for making loot out of looting the floor tiles, that sort of thing. And this is a big dungeon that's part of that. It's set in that world. It's below a city, I believe, called Chirophorn. I will see as I go whether I've got that right. But it's below a city called Chirophorn. It's just been rediscovered. It's an ancient burial complex, along with other caverns and so on. But the core of it is an ancient burial complex of almost prehistoric, not literally because there's textual history, but early history, ancient history, thousands of years ago. Elves, the South Argolian elves who are here, particularly relevant is that they were corrupted by and to the worship of chthonic deities, the evil, or rather chaotic, I guess, pantheon, rather than the lawful pantheon. And so there's lots of undead, and there's lots of weird stuff going on. And yeah, it's an interesting product. I enjoyed reading it and looking through it. Just to give some outline of how we'll do this, there's a bunch of stuff in the back end, so about 2/3 or just over are the adventure. And then the back third or so is other stuff, as you can see. Classes, monsters, magic items, spells, and some guidelines for adapting the adventure, etc. And I'll probably address these less, partly because things like spells and indeed the monsters, many of the spells and monsters and indeed some of the items are also in other ACKS books, or in the case of the monsters I'm thinking of, they're actually OGL'd from people like Matt Finch, from and other people. Kind of, there's some good monsters being brought in from other products under the OGL, which is great fun. I like to see that. Whatever has happened to the OGL now, it's nice, that kind of collaborative element of game creation. There are some great magic items, and I might try to pick out some of those, but I think in the first instance we'll stick to the adventure on the whole, and then touch on some of the other stuff if necessary. As I sometimes do with these very big PDF adventures, I will probably somewhat randomly dip into the text to try to find evidence for what I want to talk about. Much of it is, will be fit for our use in terms of talking about style and talking about quality, things like that. Let's just get through. So we've got lots of backers, introduction, and a timeline. Timeline up to Imperial Year 381. So this is the Auran Empire, I believe, is the Imperium or Empire at play. There's an ecology. This just generally sums up what's down there. Features of including construction, how things work. You've got your heavy bronze doors, inscriptions, sarcophagi, sewer sludge rules, including, I believe, the sewer sludge has a more harsh and less harsh version. Is this the one? Or is that something? Yeah, here we go. You can have, for instance, that sewer miasma explodes as soon as you light a torch, or please apologise to your players on behalf of Autark. And here's a general table for the many war burials. Necromancy summary. This is a good thing that's going to be relevant as we look, that there's that basically you can see that there is an enormous amount of preparatory material, and some of it, basically some of it, many DMs are going to find less useful than some DMs. There'll be some minority, and let's introduce a concept here, which I think is going to be relevant. That there's no point in wondering or worrying about the extreme outliers amongst gamers or DMs who might run or play a given module. If people are actually idiots or simply don't really want to play the kind of game that D&D is, they're actually idiots. But no, let's say they're people who really want a different kind of game altogether. Then it's going to be strange to say, oh well, we played L1, and you know what? They just hated the fact that there's this bone hill. Just hated it, or they didn't understand what a monster was. Yeah, sure, that's going to happen, but it's so irrelevant to the discussion of the module. And the same with the other end, that there might be some people who are so into certain elements of the game, but if they are a almost intangible minority, there's no point in saying, well, my real fans are amongst the 7 people who are simultaneously into Dungeons and Dragons, and also have academic careers in the Tuscan disputations of Cicero. That's a very niche product, and there's no point in saying, yes, let's review it for those 7 people. And so here, what I'm generally going to say, and what my general finding is that if you look at the upper and lower bound, the upper and lower median of people who want to play a fairly classically styled D&D of exploration and adventure, the lower bound of people in this particular sample it's about detail orientation, are going to find, whether they're DMs or sometimes players, the exact kind of, let's call it Macrisian naturalism. Macris would talk about simulationism. Macrisian naturalism would find it too much at points, would find certain things either repetitious, or would find the amount of detail you have to process too high. But that's not to say they wouldn't think there's lots of good in it. The upper bound of players or the upper median would probably find a lot of it more satisfactory, suited to them. There might still be some bits that are too much. There might be some bits they wish they knew more about. But it's going to depend where you are on that spectrum of DM or player, if you're, when you're thinking about what your players will enjoy, as to how much information is out there. And yeah, one of the most useful, that virtually everyone should find useful things, is the mummy reactions to being woken. Is that there are many, many mummies in these tombs. That's a particular gimmick of the mega dungeon, because of the South Argolian elves, their corruption leading to immortal power, particularly because they've been corrupted into wanting to escape biological death via entry into undeath, and so they've turned to the chthonic deities to help them with it. And so the idea that you're like, well, you need to have some variation, because otherwise, and this is wisdom from the designer, it's going to be less interesting and more boring if you either assume all mummies attack as the obvious one. There are some semi-scripted responses for mummies throughout the text, so how far you exactly need this, I don't know. But I think it's plainly an attempt to make sure, look, there are areas of this where you could have a lot of similar encounters, and you need to have some kind of variation, either heavily scripted variation, or by heavily scripted, I don't mean linear, I mean as in everything is scripted, or you need to have random generation. And random generation allows you to have a shorter script, basically. So yeah, this is very useful. Other stuff, like the exact timeline, is going to be of interest to some people. I suspect, even of the DMs who like ACKS and who like this module, how many are going to really inculcate that timeline and really be like, I'm on top of it, is going to be fairly low. That's really the upper part of that upper medium bound only, and beyond. But those people are dangerous and not to be trusted. So yes, that's a kind of general principle that you can see already. I make it 90 pages into the PDF, which is 17 pages, and none of this stuff is complete guff. Some of it is marginal. Like, I do think things like timelines and stuff are essentially, unless you are going whole hog, and pairing this with the AX3 Capital of the Borderlands, pairing the two of them together and being like, look, here is our setting, this is the world we're playing in, that begins to make a degree more sense, because then having all the information, it might come up sometime. I think if you've got a setting box set with a timeline, that's different. As an adventure, it feels less relevant. You see the distinction I'm making anyway. But I think pairing it as it was in the Kickstarter with AX2 makes it make more sense. But yeah, none of this is wasted, even if some of it is more marginal. I wonder whether I found it very, very slightly. I, I don't. It doesn't seem overwritten on the whole. But there's not lots of excess descriptors. There aren't weird passive constructions, things that you would cut and kill in editing. There's not many of them anyway. I think the sheer length is is to do with density. It's long. There's lots of information, and the information is dense, and so you're like, wow, there's so many things here. There is a layout thing. Layout. It's double column, but it's not tiny text. It's medium text, and there are plenty of layout tricks, and there are some in world texts, and table there of randomly generated names and an example. The way that the layout works naturally tends to push the length. It's not compacting the length. Let's just say, it is just pushing the length. And I think that's it. There's a usability trade-off there that I probably prefer. If layout is pushing the length, I prefer it to be layout that is there, as it often is here, to increase usability. Actually, the opposite, the idea that you use layout to compress length, though can sometimes be helpful, can be a false god, really, because you sacrifice usability. Even though it looks more usable, it is less usable. I'd rather you took the space to say what you need to say. There's also a lot of full pieces of art or half-page pieces of art, which are greatly enjoyable in some cases. Some of them I really liked. There's a kind of question there that reminds me of how I think about one of the two length issues on Wizards products, is to do with incredibly heavy use of art, by that large pieces of art as well, particularly on a 2-column setup, and I think, yeah, there's a balance there that if you're going to cut something, cut the art, as controversial as it might sound. Wandering Monsters special equipment. Random encounters here. You've got pretty detailed random encounters, including average XP for those encounters. Yeah, and this is meant to sum up, I think, the general leveling. That this, depending on where you are, you've got stuff that is suiting 1st to 6th level characters. I don't know. I haven't done all these stats. I don't think it's necessarily would not necessarily claim, oh, all characters who do a good amount of this will just get to 6th level. But I think there's obviously, when you look at the sheer amounts of treasure in the middle and back ends, particularly when you look at the amount of monsters you can be killing, there's a lot of XP out there. And so without having done the maths, it's certainly it's not a Stonehell situation where you wonder how people are meant to level up, which is the problem with Stonehell, basically. To put it in those terms, to put it negatively, is that you're like, okay, so there's all these rooms, there's 100 rooms, and this is meant to get them up to 2nd or 3rd level, but I'm not even sure it's going to get them up to 2nd, let alone 3rd, which I think is not a problem here. Unsettling events, so you can see a couple of pieces of full art. Stuff about location key. Here, we'll just look at the upper half here of this map. This is a glorious map, isn't it? This is a very Dyson map. It's by Dyson, I guess, which is why. But you can see there's a lot of stuff going on and different kinds of environments. You've got natural caverns, you've got a river, you've got some side tombs, you have some kind of larger complex, and some smaller built complexes. There's lots of, and you also have over-under stuff, not the, like here, M19 crossing there, C10 being directly over this. You have other water sources, A1, the main sewer entrance coming down here. You've got Dyson's signature there. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting map ideas in there. It is not, maps don't need to be as world-breakingly interesting as, again, sometimes people say, but there is definitely more than enough going on here in terms of many loops, obviously, many ways through different areas, and yeah, and particularly when you think about some of the verticalities and the way that the verticalities play or how they're meant to play, there should be lots of ways through and around, basically. We'll just look at this entrance cave A1 as a good sample, as good as most things in the book are, of the style. And so you have boxed text, you've got a description, a cesspool sits 30 feet beneath the public latrines at the centre of Kaifaron, old city. Cesspool wall and floor are coated with muck, mould, filth, and refuse from the latrines above. Ruined frescoes are dimly visible through the layer of sludge. Archways in the sewer, in the northwest and northeast of the cesspit slope, lead to large sewer tunnels intended to carry the sewer runoff. However, the sewer tunnels are receiving less waste than they ought, for much of the sewer sludge is instead spilling into a door-sized hole in the floor. Here. After through the hole, the slow-moving stream of refuse flows into a tunnel and down a flight of winding rough-hewn steps to A2. A carcass scavenger hides in the tunnel below the cesspool, eating the animal waste. Comes its way. It can't be seen from the cesspool. Gains +1 to surprise. Lore. So here you can see you've got a very strong, in that, I mean, stylistically strong tasting set of layout choices. So you have the box text. You then have, if there's a monster, you then have if there's any lore information, and you've got you can see the map being cut down here. And this is, I've reviewed Castles Zinterland here. This is a good way to do things, being able to quickly refer to an overmap. Zinterland also had the advantage of having actual physical fold-out maps separate from the book. And then you can also look at the subsection to get a clear, so when you're looking, you know what's where, so where you need to refer to. Oh, they've gone this way, I need to go to D1, C1, B1. You can see here from the entrance, you have, apart from these couple of rooms and a fairly linear line obviously here, you have 4 rooms exiting off, if you count this as one long linear section, A1 to A4. You've got C1, C2A, B1 and D1. Anyway, monster, straight up, it's a carcass scavenger, a carcass crawler, with, you'll notice here, it has some, this looks at saves fighter 2, HP 14, HD 3+1. This side of it is, pretty, attack numbers 8, is pretty much all translatable, even if, within reason, but all translatable to a traditional BX or with the slight changes AD&D game. There are things you realise as you're looking at skill checks and stuff, and we'll see that in it shortly, is you'll realise that there's also a bunch of this which is heavily spec'd for ACKS. So maybe it'll be worth commenting on the adaptability, which I went back and forth on. So yeah, you can see lore, you can wipe away mould and filth, but there is the risk of sewer sludge to reveal images of a procession of white-gowned elven maidens. You can then use lore mastery or theology. You can identify the procession as depicting the worship of Mitiara, who's an Empyrean goddess of community, charity and civic virtue, called Damara by the elves, and is the patron deity of the Northern Argolians. Again, caving engineering or mapping. Investigate the hole, you can determine the floor above the tunnel is broken by the accumulated pressure of years of sewage striking it. Location A1 on the Nethercity equates to location 12U on the Kaifaron Undercity map. So yeah, it matches you up with AX2. So, anyway, you can see, and this is that you'll also have stuff like traps are marked in the same way here. I relatively speaking, I quite like the clear set out of things. I'd rather, bluntly, and I say this with bias because I use this when I format my own stuff for other people's use, but brighter colours, so lore is not there in this nice maroon or deep scarlet or whatever, but is instead, I don't know, bright green or something. So you can quickly tell what sections watch and stuff, and that's the section heading. You can see this takes its space. The way this is laid out, because of using the submap rather than only ever using pushing back to the big overmap. So compare this to Gygax. Gygax can get much more detail into a single page, because here we've hit, because of the map the use of the map. It's double column elsewhere, but here it's single column with mid-sized text with fairly large amounts of white spacing around information, and of course accidental white spacing where the map necessitates it essentially, and then lots of maps, and then you've also got this. So in terms of the rooms per page is very low. It is not by very low. That's unfair, because very low is when you read and you know, this thing I talked about a long time ago in a Tomb of Annihilation review. You're talking about perfectly decent supplement with plenty of good ideas, but which nonetheless somehow you're looking at like seven area, fairly minor locations which just take over a page per room because of the art, because of the mapping, because of the text, and I think that's kind of part of what you've got here, but much much less bad. It's just that, you know, and this is not about wasted text either, unless you count the exact splitting up. You know, you can niggle over the exact splitting up of box text versus info text, but the box text is obviously meant to be the public text, and I think that's useful enough. The style is not insanely colourful. The other thing that you can immediately see from here is it assumes a proficiency system. ACKS has that. Certainly, other D20 systems have it, and so does second edition, and indeed 1.5 if you use non-weapon proficiencies. I do use NWPs, so that's fine. If not, what you're gonna, the adaptation for that side of it, you're going to have to quickly decide whether you're just wholly relying on secondary skills if you use those, or whether there's a degree of your character just knows this. It's a bit of a classic, but you can, you know, in any game, if you're a sensible DM, you are sometimes just concluding, of course, the character knows the answer to this. But it does remove something that is an assumed challenge here. So for adaptability, you know, you've got a slightly different experience if you don't have proficiencies. Now let's just comment on, and this is not at all a bad example of it. You have two lore pieces of information here. You've got a decent monster setup in a one in the tunnel beneath the cesspool. You know, presumably round, so into a tunnel down. Yeah, so that they are. It's just hiding somewhere in A1, I guess. But yes, then you have good setup. Then you have some lore you can find out, and one is neither of these. This is relevant. Neither of these is immediately game relevant. By that I mean neither of them is an immediate marker of another trap that might be somewhere. There are many examples that are more like this, but I'm just trying to highlight something here. Neither of these is immediately giving information for somewhere else in the setting, in the dungeon. Neither of these is immediately telling you stuff you're going to use negotiating with people. Neither of them is giving you kind of a tactic to use against someone. One of them gives you information about the whoever first built this, who they worshipped, and what that gives you the first part of the story of the corruption of the Southern Argolians, I guess, from worship of the Empyrean gods, the lawful gods, to the chthonic gods, the chaotic gods. The second is the floor above the tunnel is broken open by years of... Of course, that feels somewhat self-evident because of the fact there's a bunch of poo pouring through the hole. But I guess it allows... Players might wonder, has someone dug up, and that's what's caused the accident or not. And I guess they can find that out. These are both very marginal kinds of extra knowledge. That's all I'm saying. And there's plenty of that. And this relates, actually, there's a... I'll bring that when I get there, actually. But there's a few things there which I think are going to appeal to either the top of the upper bound we've talked about, or the area beyond, and that take up a reasonable amount of space. And there's a judgment call there about how far you as a DM are going to use that. You know, I think it's fine having the information there. In terms of efficiency of space and compressing stuff, and I do prefer information compressed. Some people are the opposite. They're like, just give me a room per page. I don't care. That's better, because then I flick through the pages. I like the information compressed on the whole, and so for me, it's more questionable. However, that said, it's not like I dislike it. It's just a reflection on what's going on stylistically. To continue that kind of sense of getting a good strong sample of what's going on, we'll look at the start of section B. And this highlights some interesting things decision-wise, which about how it's laid out and how it's usable. Here we have a half-page piece of art with this odd scarab-beetled head guy, and then we have B1, early entrance tomb, and strange scarab face being surrounded by a throng of elves. This basically is an alien who will corrupt these elves. This is cool, and this is one of the things in terms of if you want something that is very, truly Gygaxian in spirit, or Kunsian as well, but these ideas of, and also, looking at your progenitors of this tradition, in particularly on the Lovecraft Howard side of things, these kind of weird and hidden depths are great. The thing that I was particularly struck by here was one, you've got the big use of this. Is this a good use of space? It's going to depend on the DM. I like illustrations. I see why there are illustration booklets, though. You can copy and paste this if you're playing online, but if you're playing in person, it's less useful. But I like the illustration, so I'm not against that. I think I'd rather it's an illustration booklet, however. Here, you're going to have the description. It's slightly long, but not incredibly heavy. Monster graves. There's skeletons in the graves. This relevant thing here is that they are dated. And what we're going to find is that graves, generally speaking, are dated in terms of before the Empire, before the Oran Empire takes over this area. And this is something which seems totally irrelevant. Just, you're like, great, thanks for that. Why not just let it be entirely diegetic? But part of the information there is meant to be that because you can track the corruption of the elves, and you've seen that they worship the Empyreans upstairs, but now in this very early area, we have the Great Corruptor, we call him. We have this Khepri turn up, and he's going to be corrupting them to early Chthonic tomb. Great. This is helpful, right, isn't it? Because it slowly tells the story of this, but that's not just random empty information. It's going to warn players about difficulty and risk, because the later the tombs, the more advanced the undead. So the more recent the tombs, the more advanced the undead. Now it has to be said, this is a sort of we talk about Kunsian depths. This is a Macrisian depth. I should return to Macrisian naturalism, but Macrisian depth, which often comes hand in hand with Macrisian naturalism, is this sense that having a high view on the real information of the world, of the secondary world, but the real information of the world, and really getting a grasp of that as players, deepens the experience by giving you more knowledge that does actually affect how you play. And I think that's a fun idea. I have not run this module, so I don't know if this would work exactly. You do find players pick up information about this is more like this section. That happens when you actually play dungeons. If there's stuff designed in there about architecture and art and stuff, I've definitely had players do that. I don't know exactly how effective this would be, and if this is a lot of, relatively speaking, information being built in, even if it's only small information each time, that will very rarely see use. I don't know, but I think it's a nice idea. You've got a trap with a cracked tile floor that can fall, and then you can identify Khepri, and Khepri is not actually an individual, I believe. I think it's the whole race of scarab-headed aliens. You can identify it as a Khepri. You can see there's no treasure there. You can see in the next room there is, so in B2 there is a canopic shrine, blah blah blah, and then you have the total worth of everything in the room and the weight, 9 stone. You'll find, I think the stones are, I don't know exactly what system this is using. I think because I'm thinking of a stone as being £14, the fact they're divided into 6 stresses me out, but I imagine there is actually a logic that is explained, so it doesn't actually bother me. But yes, this is good. I haven't done this before, but I do try to sum up all the treasure in a dungeon in my opening information, say this is what's here, and this is good that as a DM you know what you're looking at. if they take everything, that's how much gold they've looted, right? I think, as with anything, you can always be like, what's the best way to do the information? But I like that. The actual treasure descriptions, by the way, there are 4 terracotta canopic jars of embalmed organs, 4 terracotta vases painted with geometric patterns, plus the canopic shrine itself. The canopic shrine is a canopic shrine of gilded cedar adorned with bronze cobras. This is really good treasure. The treasure is not overly lengthy, and I know some people, some DMs, some players, but I'm thinking about DMs particularly, might be like, oh, who cares? And certainly some players will have the same attitude. I don't care about the information about the treasure. I want to know essentially the XP value out of it, and if it's necessary, the weight. There's a certain amount of functionality. I think that is, in terms of density of information, right at the lower bound we've talked about and beyond. People who, on that point at least, those people are at the lower bound of the density of information they want. And this is obviously, you can see that this is tending toward the upper bound. Virtually all the examples I'm bringing up of what's distinctive here are about upper bound stuff, which is what ACKS is marketed for. However, I like slightly, let's call it pungent names for treasure. Things that are memorable, which are easily noted down so you know the difference between things, and which give a sense of the environment, because players are, I think, usually, most of the players we're talking about, do enjoy exploring the secondary fiction. And so just little tags and hangers for that help. You can see, by the way, here more, because this is still the same area. 3000 BE, you've got skeletons with bronze short swords and so on. There's another trap, etc., etc. You do have areas, this is just in C, of natural monsters. Much later on, you also have the you have both. There is a variety of enemies. This is actually what I want to say. I'm using this to say there are a tribe of troglodytes. There's a tribe of white apes. They can interact. There are patterns of movement of the troglodytes through the map. There are order of battle remarks generally for the intelligent creatures. So there are, in those cases, 2 intelligent living monstrous humanoids. There's also animal types, cavern locusts, and indeed other animal types, and I think there's several groups of cavern locusts in this area. So there are a variety of enemies. This helps because essentially having, what might end up being, I'm trying to think exact, presumably like 200 rooms or whatever it might be of just undead is going to be boring. Basically, like the one doesn't need to defend or justify this in terms of any kind of naturalism. To just say, look, a bit of variety is good, and the idea that a dungeon has a feel, but within that dungeon there is variety that fits that feel, and there might be different variety and different things within a different dungeon, but that's okay. It doesn't matter, but there needs to be variety within the dungeon as well as between dungeons. And I think that helps. Now, that's to say, the flip side is there are a lot of undead, and I think you could imagine a session or a couple of sessions on the trot. You're having a really good time, but you have a couple of sessions of fighting a lot of skeletons and having several mummy encounters, and particularly in some of the clustered tomb areas. And you could be like, that felt fairly homogenous. And that's not necessarily always a good feeling. And not, as I say, not because I don't think players actually sit there and be like, we fought undead all session, this is the worst game ever. But I'm trying to draw out a thing there about essentially just because it seems to fit the dungeon logic doesn't make it a better experience for the players. There's a certain, and this is where the Gygaxian Monster Hotel, which isn't necessarily my favourite kind of dungeon, one thing he's doing there is he's like, the naturalism is that they have the Gygaxian naturalism is they have a place within this place. This is their room, this is what makes sense in their room, and you can kind of see how they might survive. Yes, it is weird. They live 100 yards or so from something that they might want to fight, or from some from some monsters or some demi-humans or something. But the point is that at least there, what you know in that case is, as long as it's not particularly obnoxious, nonsensical example, when you're playing Zodkanth, you know that it's going to be interesting. There's lots of different challenges. There's lots of different, and something like Sword Thrust, the excellent roll aids. It's a monster hotel basically that justifies itself via its internal conceit, and it's just very fun, but it does mean there is this slightly, and that's right at the edge of acceptability, I think, Sword Thrust. I like it a lot. I've run it, greatly enjoyed it. But the sense in which, like, it, there's always going to be something interesting around the corner does push players on. And I think there is a risk when there is not that variety of players disengaging. And it is good, therefore, that Nethercity has a good variety of monster types. That said, there are probably some points where it's going to be repetitious. And this leads me to, let's define, not positively or negatively, I'm largely sympathetic with it, but just for the purpose of the conversation, Macrisian naturalism, as I'm calling it, and you must pronounce it like that, is the idea that, it's a simulationist approach in one sense of that word, and the simulation is of what would a fantasy world really be like? And there's really interesting, you can take different approaches to this. I'm thinking about conversations and debates I've been involved in. You have people going from the whole, I just pick stuff that, I think I'll enjoy right then and there, the players will enjoy at that point. And then you have what I suppose is where I fall in lots of ways. Let's call it the middle ground, because that makes me sound better. There is this, you are creating a world that is independent of the player characters. Of course, you might create stuff partly in reaction to players going places. I have an issue right now with trying to work out what's north of the Emeraldy Plain before Verbabonk in my Greyhawk game, because of just something's happened that's led to players being there. And so there's a degree of reaction to player action, but there's also a degree to which you're like, what might be there anyway, and this is where world building you have to accept it's its own hobby that is not there. So the players have to do all the stuff you create. There's some sense of separation between you, the DM, as a creator, and you, the DM, someone running the game, so that you're not forcing players into stuff. There is enough of a world out there with lots of stuff that exists, and players will explore the things they want to. And some stuff might happen because they don't take action, but in some cases, they just don't see that content, if you want to put it that way. And I probably fall there, of kind of, you're creating a world that exists without the players, albeit in interaction with them, and has its own coherent logic. And then you have this is the upper bound we're talking about here, and definitely beyond, is no, things have to be like, what would happen? Essentially, it's hyper Tolkienianism. What would happen if a universe, this world really existed, based on certain kind of presumptions. And here you've got this detailed history, the age of the tombs and the corruption of the elves. Exactly, it relates to this, doesn't it? The idea that you're like, okay, this is actually what would happen, and if people pay close attention to the clues and really think, what would it be the case if it happened, they will learn something that's actually kind of useful. This is an old tomb. This is we need to be really prepped. You get the idea, anyway. So, and I think that really characterises this, and that explains some of these things. Obviously, here, here's another example, by the way, of the layout stuff. Trick, if the locusts are shrieking, more locusts. Wandering monsters might arrive due to the shrieking. Classic. So it's a trick, and in a Gygaxian sense, it's a noise trick. It may draw more wandering monsters. A lot, but as I say, plenty of the information we're given, including sometimes when you have very detailed, comparatively, not overwritten, but very detailed boxed text. Here, I think you are, some of that is because there is this desire and attempt to give not just a textured world for secondary fiction, but a world which can be bought as an alternate primary. I don't mean in some weird delusional sense, I just mean as in like, this is like Middle-earth. And I think that is both adds value and is also at the heart of some of the kind of questionable trade-offs I've mentioned. So you will have your own opinion on that. Here we have, much later into the M's, we've got something at 2100 BE, and you can see that the canopic jars and red figure terracotta urns are slightly more valuable. So we're later on, and even the treasure slightly goes farther up because the urns hold more gold. These people are wealthier as they've advanced in their craft, and so we've gained some more. this is essentially a fairly banal example of what is being done here, but I think it's a useful way to track the naturalism we're talking about with the dungeon design. Is as you're heading down into the volcanic tubes, further down into the abyssal level, they've dug deeper, they've dug too deep, and they have more money and stuff is going later. But of course, that also means here the deep level large sepulchre has three mummy warlords who are, these are not super powerful mummies for this module, but HD5 plus 1 star, mummy rot, fearsome visage, and these guys are not casters as well. You can get treasure out of them, which is 1500 XP GP worth, that's to say. They are each worth 660. So this is not an insanely valuable, it's just over 3,500 room. But you can see that this is much more dangerous than the cave locust. It's much more dangerous even than the carcass crawler, which is a pretty nasty opening encounter. You can see over here again, you have lore, a successful lore mastery of theology proficiency show says this is Nargund, the dusk wolf, chthonic god of predators hunting in the night. So you again have, and then you have a statue that can send people into blood rage. This is not super trap heavy for a tomb module. There are not loads of traps and tricks, like the classic every room has a trap, or this is the cliche idea of the Egyptian pyramids with lots of traps. There are a few, and Macris. I think Macris is very good at these on the whole. I do think it's interesting the idea of sending because if you are influenced, if you're injured and you're near Nargon's statue, you may go into a blood rage, and or you may choose to fail voluntarily, and then you go crazy. You get bonus. It's +2 bonus to attack throws and damage rolls, and become immune to fear. There is a roll-up system here. It is an oddity of ACKS that it is a retro clone that mandatorily changes the attack mode from the original. You decrease damage, etc. It can be reduced to 0 but not less than 0, etc. And yeah, blah blah blah. So yeah, you get the idea. It is genuinely, you're discovering more, things are more powerful. The individual as a sample, that's a pretty good trick to, I think, say, look, there's a lot of flavour and interest, especially because you could choose to leverage that to go and be like, I'm going to go and clear out. We think there's mummies there, or there's white apes, because that's the intelligent living foe in the area. I'm just going to trigger this and we're going to go crazy. One thing here, by the way, depending on how long it took the adventurers to open the door, the mummies may either just be rising or already roused when the adventurers enter. But you're going to need to roll an encounter check, a reaction check on the table in the introductory material to find out, do they attack or are they more reasonable? Incredibly valuable alchemical laboratory library, 50,000 gold, albeit weighs 170 stone. And you can see lots of scroll jars, dragon control, potion formula, lots of scrolls, bloody flux, endless slumber, temporal stasis, lots of powerful spells, including new spells that are detailed in the appendices. So yeah, you also have a good example there of there's some detailed sub areas with different themes. To give let's give one more detail where we've got like a big nasty encounter here, because this summarizes some of the remaining areas really, until you find the secret alien hideaway of where the Kepri is. It's in cryogenic stasis. One other cool, I'll say it here because I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it without without messing around a bit. But there is an area with there's a couple of portals that go to other worlds. One goes to a chthonic hell realm, I guess, and one goes to another ACKS setting, not the Oran Empire, but barbarian conquerors of something, which is much more pulpy sword and sorcery fiction. And that's fun. That's a classic trope. But I think it it shows an ambition and a joy and a pleasure, and it's a sincere thing as well, in the sense that you think, no, this would actually happen. People are actually going to go and do this. There's a product you can get. It's pay to play, sure, like any game is, but you get it's. I like it. That was a touch I particularly liked. There's stuff like in terms of the secrets as you dig deeper, the portals to other realms, the the going to finding the alien scarab head dude behind this, who can end up, who might, and it makes me think actually of the little creature from the Dragon Prince. Actually, that guy does. Um, but who could even playing for time, thinking I can't defeat these adventurers, try to negotiate, say offer themselves perhaps as some sort of preacher of knowledge, much as they did 3,000 years ago, or something like that, and try to corrupt a new generation. I think that's clever, and it's fun and it's satisfying. Now, you're getting through, relatively speaking, a lot of wall graves, and there's plenty of treasure in those wall graves, white apes, troglodytes, cave locusts to get there. The amount of content you're moving through, um, as it's going to depend on the exact taste of a party and on a degree of kind of whether you get into a good rhythm of getting through stuff quickly, as to whether or not it will end up feeling like a grind or not. I think there's a sense there could be some grind, but the payoffs are very good, and a lot of, as I said, the tricks and the treasure are very good as well. You do have, deep down, you have a number of complex big encounters. So here you have the Hierophant, you've got the mummy Lord Hierophant, Orthonac, his lover Seora, and Orthonac and his bodyguard Kasser. They may be either just rising or already roused. It does say under loot, because of the stuff Orthonac has. If given time to prepare, he'll cast these things. He'll begin combat with Circle of Agony. Here, I guess you could still roll on the reactions. Some of these examples sound a lot like the mummy is going to attack when you enter, which is fine. I think having prescriptive reactions is fine. But yes, you can see that they are prepared for combat. And of course, given how much stuff they've got, look at, both magical lamellar armor and swords, rod of elemental spheres, brace of protection, staff of the serpent, very valuable, silver crown with a frame of rearing serpents with jet eyes, 2,000 gold. There's lots of treasure here. This is a worthwhile group of monsters to destroy. You can see these are not going to be simple. I've got 12 with 7 stars. Is that, I think, 6 or 7 stars? You've got very tough monsters. This is functionally, in lots of ways, because you're now presumably at 6th or 7th level, is the assumption. You're on the abyssal level. At this point, this is about as far as, in the classic dungeon mode, BX/Spec me really work. You can go to other people with their opinions on why that is, but the way in which kind of everything balances out together and the amount of tactical granularity and nuance. AX, of course, begins to replace that increasingly with you're going to be running domains and stuff. Whereas AD&D presumes, though you will have domains, much more the interest once you're into the high level, being 9th level, let's say, but it's going to be much more you are going and fighting bigger, weirder, crazy monsters. You see that with the inclusion of archdevils and demon princes. You're going to go and kill those things. And whatever the failure of Q1 is pushing you in that direction of going out to the plains and dealing with great beings. But yeah, this is a big, nasty encounter. This, you see, proficiencies including the summary of what they do. So, for instance, battle magic means they're quicker at casting spells. Unflappable casting doesn't lose action if casting disrupted. Unflappable casting struck me a bit as, it's in Birthright, there's a blood power which counters specific blood powers around mind reading. And it's like, oh man, every NPC in this adventure has this, but this one blood power, that's suspicious. And of course it's because designers very quickly realise that this is a risk they don't want to take. And a lot of these high level monsters have it, which is almost certainly there to ensure they are... This is not Macrisian naturalism. This is design based on the idea that kind of whomping over these guys, even if he's got 55 hit points, but because you've managed to get the right gear together and you've got a strong party, whomping over these guys because you disrupt their spells isn't going to be cool. That's a debatable design choice. But it certainly, it shows that there's an intentional design here to make this an interesting, fun encounter. Up to 6th level spells here, of course. Globe of Invulnerability, Soul Eating, Torpor, Wall of Corpses, and has divine spells as well. And then Seora, again, is less powerful. Kasser is 9+1 ***. His big deal is just that he's going to hurt you. Albeit he only has one attack, so relying somewhat on toughing it out and being a powerful undead to and possibly plus any ambush or jump they get, but so that he can get stuff down. This is an interesting thing actually, and this is, you see a debate on this in about AD&D monsters. Should they get secondary actions on, when you have their random at will in innate magical powers described? And though I think the general witness is for no, and that's how I generally play it. Some people like Anthony Huso would say yes, some of these extra things are things you can also do, and I think the reason you might be tempted to think that is when you realise, and this is partly something, this doesn't actually, it might come out, you might suspect it from reading it, but I'm really thinking about the amount you play when you realise the swing can be so massive on something missing and the player's just really managing to pile damage on. I see that as the luck of the draw. I think that's fine, but I think it's something which you can wonder, why have they got all these powers if they don't get to use them? It's different for a mummy fighter, a 9th level mummy fighter with, who's mostly deciding whether they do mummy rot or hit with a sword. So I'm not as worried about it here, but I think it does strike me that we're talking about a guy here who has, he's got a bonus to initiative, but he has 1 attack and 44 hit points, and a strong party could sweep him pretty quickly. You can bypass this if you've learnt Orthonac. I think there's some information in an earlier area about the people further down, and yeah, there's a big sarcophagi with worth 24,000 gold each. 24,000 gold total, sorry. So yeah, you can see you end up with these kind of quite complex, there's lots of spells and things you need to know. You need to know their order of battle in terms of what they're doing, and if there are reinforcements nearby, because there's other examples where there are, there might be skeletons in the room beforehand, and then these guys will prepare while the skeletons are fighting, or whatever the particular gimmick is. It's good, it's wargamey. I think those will be satisfying, memorable battles, and because this is a war game, players do want that. Combat is not a failure state per se. It can be fun. So yeah, what we'll do to finish, actually, I'll just go down to some magic items just to kind of talk about that. So new treasure. You've got some things that I mentioned, you're told they are also in Heroic Fantasy Handbook, which is an ACKS book, or Axioms, which I think is at the magazine or something, or like a periodical. I don't know. Someone explain in the comments. But these are new magical items, and so general caveat: magical items and spells, and there's a lot of new spells, some which are repeated from other sources, but are not in the original rulebook. New magic items and new spells are risky business in a way that actually very often subclasses and stuff in this kind of game are not, because new items and new spells can just become the strongest thing. So I don't know how far. I'd assume, given a lot of playtesting did happen over this in multiple campaigns, I imagine that most of this stuff has had some, and these are clever people as well. I think I trust their design judgment a lot more than I trust some other creators. But I can't vouch for how balanced this is. I've not run it either. But there's a lot of flavour here. Bag of fairy seeds. You end up controlling an area of plants near the seed that you plant. The Candle of Comfort clears out pests. There is a bathtub of the goddess that changes your sex. Those are just some examples. These are memorable things which are going to be fun to find, and you can definitely steal. So one thing is that I think if you can definitely use the back third of this in other ACKS adventures, campaigns, the classes which are mostly based around elven cultists and the powers of those people who ended up being corrupt, the Southern Argonian elves, basically. You could use those in other ACKS things. Of course, they are very much geared for that. It's going to take a lot of effort to turn them into anything else, even old school essentials classes or something. It'll take some effort, let alone into second edition kits, because I think that's the equivalent. There's no hope of backtracking these simply into AD&D classes, but they could be kits. It's going to take a lot of effort, and so that side of it is less adaptable. But the magic items themselves, pretty adaptable. You can work out if you're like, I'm not actually sure. What about how does this affect these spells? This at least 1d8 points damage to the lowest HD swarm of creatures. that should work fine, because the damage codes are fairly similar between editions and in that context, and it's generally descriptive rather than using bands, where a band can become a problem where the band assumptions between BECMI and AD&D are different. And there's potential risk here to do with the charmed plant monster and it saves, but I doubt in practice. I think what you just need to do is go and check what a shambling mound is. Is it 12 or I don't know in AD&D compared to what it is in 8 maybe in BX, if there is one in BX. Go and compare the two and check the difference, and then change those boundaries. This stuff's adaptable. It's not that hard. These are very creative. The spells, there's many spells, and you'd require close attention before introducing any of them into a campaign. Obviously, if you're running a ACKS campaign in Kypharon, Macrisian, then I think you're more likely to take the risk, and I think you'll get away with it. But that'd be my comment on this stuff. Is the spells in some ways excite me less because it's a bit like reading a new set of Exalted Charms, where I'm like, I'm really going to have to process this to know how it fits. The magic items I thought were really good, much like many of the tricks were very good. This is a cool statue thing, or this is an interesting way, or the order of battle information. This is the way they're going to fight you in this area. I think basically my conclusion then is let's get up to the cover. I think my conclusion is that this is good. This is very good. I think there are some caveats as to who's going to use this, who's going to enjoy it more. I think there are some real processing questions. This isn't something. I think it's going to be much more difficult than Castles Interland to be like, do you know what? We'll just run this tonight. Not impossible, because I think you can say, you find the sewer entrance. Here's room A1, and you go. I don't think that's impossible. I think the degree to which you're going to run it well, it requires you to absorb much more information than Zinterland does. I think there are some potentially questionable decisions about exactly whether information is bang for buck, if it's worth bang for buck. The fact that most rooms, seem to, or not most rooms, many rooms, possibly most rooms, but at least a plurality, have lore, lots of lore information. They're like, hey, this is stuff you can learn using your proficiencies, and it will encourage a certain kind of play because the player will assume it's always relevant. And actually, often it's not going to be particularly relevant. Some of it is Macrisian depth and maybe relevant if you're really willing to put that stuff together. How exciting that is, you're going to need to be in that upper bound, upper median to really enjoy that, I think. I think the product, there's some minor layout gripes which I've outlined just to do with, I prefer compression. I think lots of people do. And this goes for expansion so that it doesn't get kind of cramped. And so it's happy to say, look, here's a map, here's a room, here's a map, here's 2 rooms. And I don't want to sniff too much at that. But I think it's, that I would have preferred a smaller text, basically smaller text, and a more disciplined approach to box text, things like that, just to make it easier so you can quickly refer between stuff rather than flicking through several pages to get to the next. The only other room you need in that entire kind of half an hour of play, you're like, oh, where is it? I'd much rather it's much easier to do that. But yes, with those caveats, I'd recommend it if it sounds like, put it this way, the classic. If that sounds like you can cope with the neutral caveats on usability and style, then I think this is a very strong recommendation. If not, you might find some stuff still here anyway, so maybe worth looking at. But anyway, if you have read this or run this, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.